if the AI gets feedback, it will start giving percentages. So it will say 80% of the time with this history, physical exam, findings, and signalment, it is going to be this, and it's probably going to be correct. But the veterinarian still needs to check. You still need to read what it writes, and you need to be thinking about it.
Hello, 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 my VetFolio friends. Thank you so much for tuning back in. In this episode, I was joined by Dr. Terry Fossum, the person who, at least in my opinion, wrote the book on surgery. That's right, I'm referring to the book aptly named Small Animal Surgery that I know I've spent many a day, maybe many a night with, preparing for surgery, or even sometimes reached for as reassurance to make sure I was on the right track with my surgical technique. I was gifted this book in vet school, and I had no idea at the time what a treasure it was, and it's just been a lifesaver in my career. So when I initially got the information that we were going to be meeting with Dr. Fossum, I was really excited, and I was all geared up to talk surgery, but we actually didn't talk about surgery very much on this episode. Instead, gosh, I don't even quite know how to describe what we talked about. We really kind of ran the gamut. We spent a little bit of time on the state of the veterinary industry, and in particular, artificial intelligence and what impact AI and some of the other rapidly developing technologies may have on our roles as practitioners, as technicians, etc., in the field over time. And then we also spent a good bit of time on drug creation and manufacturing, which was really interesting. It may surprise you to hear that Dr. Fossum has her own line of pet products and supplements, which you can find if you Google Dr. Fossum's Pet Care. And of course, with that in mind, we spent some time on supplements versus FDA-approved drugs and why something might be labeled as a supplement versus going through the FDA approval process and some of the pitfalls that might be encountered in trying to get a drug approved. It was a really interesting conversation. Dr. Fossum is just an incredibly dynamic and interesting person to talk to, incredibly nice, super smart, and yeah, it was a great talk. I really appreciate her agreeing to give us some of her time and let me pick her brain for a little while. Although at least from my perspective, I feel she needs no introduction. Let me go ahead and tell you a little bit more about Dr. Terry Fossum, and let's get into our episode. Dr. Fossum is a world-renowned board-certified veterinary surgeon, author of the best-selling textbook Small Animal Surgery, and a serial entrepreneur. Her textbook has been translated into over a dozen languages. Dr. Fossum's background includes more than 35 years of educating veterinarians and pet owners regarding diseases of companion animals. She's given over 1,000 invited lectures to veterinarians throughout the world and has served as the keynote speaker at some of those meetings. She's been honored with numerous awards, including Distinguished Alumni and Continuing Educator of the Year. Dr. Fossum is the CEO and founder of Dr. Fossum's Pet Care and CEO and president of Phoenix Animal Wellness. These companies are developing and commercializing safe, efficacious, and reliable wellness products for pets and livestock. She's also the CEO and co-founder of Veterinary Intelligent Solutions, which is developing AI solutions for veterinary medicine. Dr. Fossum has served as the principal investigator for over $30 million in research funding from industry and the federal government. In 2018, she was special assistant to the Secretary of Energy, developing STEM initiatives for the Department of Energy. She's also the founder and former director and executive director of the Texas A&M Institute for Preclinical Studies, a $60 million venture at Texas A&M University, which promotes public-private partnerships to speed the development of medical devices and drugs. In addition to her textbook, which is considered the Bible of veterinary surgery, that is 100% how I feel about it, Dr. Fossum has over 100 publications and numerous book chapters to her credit. Like I said, an incredibly dynamic and interesting conversation. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Pet parents are looking for a veterinary practitioner who can prove they understand and support the relationship they have with their pet, show you value your client's trust, and earn an official Human-Animal Bond certification from NAVC and HABRI, the Human-Animal Bond Research Institute. This certification, appropriate for all members of the healthcare team, explores the scientific benefits for veterinary staff, owners, and animals, and discusses how to establish and promote a strong human-animal bond. Enroll today at VetFolio.com.
I'm really excited to be joined for this episode by Dr. Terry Fossum. Dr. Fossum, I literally had your book open last night as we were just reviewing like a piece of a surgery to make sure that what we thought we were supposed to do was truly what we were supposed to do. It's just an invaluable resource. And I'm so excited to get the chance to sit down and talk with you.
Well, thank you so much. That book has been a labor of love for, I would say, the majority of my career. I'm actually working on the 6th edition as we speak, probably my last, but I love it.
Well, it is a phenomenal resource and has helped me through many a late night in surgery.
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry you're spending late nights in surgery, but I'm glad you have some help when you do so.
I appreciate that. This was okay because I was mostly there for moral support and, to make sure that the things were going well and help instill confidence, which, it's odd that they would pick me to instill confidence with surgery, but hey, I was happy to help.
My guess is you're way better than you're letting on.
I feel like that's one of those things I always find out in the moment. It's like, don't know if I can do this. And it does tend to work out. So I appreciate you saying that. It's kind of a little confidence boost there.
I think what you're actually doing is you've just described surgeons to me. Like we oftentimes step in situations where we aren't certain. We don't walk into every surgery, I know exactly what I'm going to find. That's just not the reality. And so we have to say to ourselves, I got this. And you have to have some confidence or you don't get through those procedures. So it sounds to me like you have the confidence and that will take you a long way.
Oh, man. I just like the experience here of you saying that to me, as like I said, as somebody who, in my opinion, wrote the book on surgery that I've used so many times. I think I'm just going to carry that with me. And the next time I'm in an OR and go, what the heck am I doing here? I'm not a surgeon. I'm going to just pull that out and remember that. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And oddly enough, we are actually not here to talk so much about surgery today, although I'm sure it will come up throughout our conversation. But gosh, I don't even know what we're here to talk about. It's a whole lot of different points that I think we'll weave our way through.
I was doing the same thing thinking about this. There's so much that we could talk about. I mean, we could talk about just where supplements are in animal health and how they're regulated. But maybe what we should do is start just talking about drug discovery in the US and where we are and why we need to do something different. And everybody needs to know that. And they need to push for that because the way that we are doing drug discovery in the US and I would say around the world is simply not sustainable. So you want to just talk about some of the numbers?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So I pulled some down off the internet. So let's just take a look at some of these numbers. And these are for shock value, but they're real numbers, so they should shock us. So in 2011, U.S. healthcare expenditures were $2.7 trillion. In 2021, that had increased to $4.8 trillion, so nearly double over that decade. It's important to know 5% of all the patients consume 50% of our healthcare dollars. So what's that mean? We are paying for chronic disease in a small number of people. So that's healthcare expenditures, but let's go down to prescription drugs. In 2018, we spent $107 billion, Medicare did, $107 billion on prescription drugs. 2028 is estimated that number will be $223 billion. So again, prescription drug costs for Medicare have nearly doubled over the last 10 years. If you look at global spending on prescription drugs in 2020, it was 1.3 trillion and is expected to increase 3 to 6% annually worldwide. And if you're just talking cancer treatments, globally, 150 billion, expected to increase 10% in each of the past 5 years, or has increased 10% in each of the last 5 years. So what's that mean? Well, in terms of our GDP, in 2024, our healthcare expenditures were about 18.7%. By 2027, it's going to be 19.4%. These are not numbers that aren't going to affect everybody. These numbers are staggeringly high and increasing exponentially.
Like you said, for shock value, but certainly effective. I know one of the areas that we've been talking about a lot lately, just in continuing education and some of the different products and approaches to managing chronic disease has really centered around microbiome medicine and the influence of, I guess, targeting the gut and the microbiome as an endpoint, not an endpoint, but as maybe a therapeutic target for managing chronic disease. So one of the numbers that kind of stuck out to me there was the spending on prescription drugs to manage chronic disease. And I don't think there's any doubt that there is, a very necessary role for prescription drugs in managing chronic disease. But that really is a staggering amount that you just listed there.
It is. And, what it says to everybody is we need to do a couple things. This is not all inclusive, but we definitely need to decrease the cost of prescription drugs. And we need to do a better job with prevention so that we don't have to treat all these chronic diseases. We've agreed we need to decrease the cost of prescription drugs. So let's talk about, how did we get here? Why is it so expensive for prescription drugs to be developed? So let's look at what it takes. And I pulled this down. I want to just look at the average time it takes to get a drug registered with the FDA, right? Because if it's a drug, let's be clear. If it's a drug, that means it's been approved by the FDA, right? If it's a supplement, it's not considered a drug per se. So if it's a drug, here's what has to happen. They're going to do early drug discovery, average time 2.5 years. And then they're going to find a lead. So they're going to find the molecule that they think is most important. And they're going to study that. And that may take, on average, 2 years. And then they're going to do their preclinical study. So they're going to do that in, let's say, rodents. Actually, 95% of the preclinical work in this country is done in rodents. Okay, so they're going to do that in rodents. That's going to take a year. And then they're going to get into their clinical trials, and they're going to start doing those. And there's 4 phases of clinical trials that you go through. And so on average, you're looking at 13.5 years from the time you start the process until you get through and you actually get your product registered through the FDA. So it's an FDA approved product. So I said 95% of that preclinical work is done in rodents. And I really believe that is a major part of the problem. So if you spend millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to get into a clinical trial, and then you get, say, through phase 1, phase 2, so early studies, you want to start a large phase 3, you've spent hundreds of millions of dollars at that point, and then your drug fails. Well, what people, I think, tend to forget is that every time a company has a drug that fails, they add those costs in to the drug that makes it through. So we pay not for just the drugs that make it through the process and get registered. We pay for all the failures. And the majority of drugs fail. If you're an oncology drug and you start the registration process through the FDA, your chance of coming out the other side with a registered product is 3.4%. 3.4%. Just costs, your pre-R&D costs be anywhere from like $160 million to $4.5 billion. So they have to charge a lot for these products. So what can we do to make drug development, to not have all these failures? And I think one of the very simple things we could do is recognize something that we've all known for decades, and that is that mouse to man is a problem. It doesn't work. We can cure cancer in a mouse every day. It doesn't work in people. And so we need to use a more predictive animal model. And Cassie, you know where I'm going with this. We need to use dogs, right? Dogs are a predictive animal model. They get all the same diseases for the most part, for the same reasons, live in the same environment, and we use the same drugs on them. Nobody develops a chemotherapeutic for rats or mice. They develop them for humans. And a lot of times those studies, if they were done in dogs, I think we'd get a more accurate idea of whether it should even go forward into a human clinical trial. But we'll get answers as to how to dose it, what the dosing interval should be, all of that. We can get that information from dogs, and it would save so much money because we could drop our failure rate significantly.
Part of what I'm hearing in what you're saying is that One Health approach to healthcare in general. And, certainly if dogs are a more predictive model, which the way you explain that certainly makes sense, all the more important role for veterinary professionals when it comes to healthcare in general, not just limited to our species, our specialty of choice, but really in playing a role in healthcare overall. I know on the vet med side, the advancement that we've seen just in the 10 years that I've been out. I mean, vet med, I think, looks very different now than it did when I graduated. And a lot of that has to do with the availability of new pharmaceuticals and things like that. And I'm sure there's a lot of transfer that can happen there between human healthcare and veterinary medicine, and an exchange of knowledge and systems and things there. One thing I do think about in terms of like all of the advance that we've seen in veterinary medicine in such a short time is veterinary students and, coming into this field where there's so much more knowledge available, and how are these poor students fitting in everything there is to know in 4 years.
Or 3 years in some schools.
Or 3 years. How are we instilling all of this knowledge into the veterinary programs in, 3 and 4 years? And what does that look like for the future, especially as I think you're illustrating here, veterinary professionals playing an increasingly important role, not just in vet med, but really in healthcare overall?
Right. I think what you're speaking to, Cassie, is really important. And that is that we do have to produce lifelong learners. What when you get out of veterinary school is going to be a tenth of what in 10 years after you finish, because that is how rapidly medicine is changing. I don't want to get into the whole AI thing, but AI is going to help with that. I truly believe, for a couple of reasons. It's going to take some of the busy work away. I mean, how many hours do you spend writing your records, right?
Not as many as I used to since AI showed up.
There you go. So if we're not spending time writing records, which is just kind of busy work, important, but busy work, we need to do it. But if we don't have to spend the time, we can spend our time learning. But I think we'll see other things too. We're going to see, they're already out there to a certain extent, algorithms where you put the history, the signal, your physical exam findings in, the algorithm's going to come up with the top 5 diagnoses. And then you're going to say, I like number 2. And then it's going to tell you, well, this is the drug that's commonly used. This is how it works. Here's how you dose it in your dog. It's all going to be automated by AI, I think.
I could absolutely see it. I actually just got an email today about like a differential diagnosis tool and all of this. And so I'd love to dive into this a little bit more, because I go back and forth. I feel like I have mixed feelings when it comes to, the records and differentials and things like that, because part of writing my record, when I would go and spell that out at the end of an appointment, I agree with you, busy work to a point, but sometimes as I'm writing the record, light bulbs would come on and I'd go, oh, as I'm writing this, I realize we should really make sure and check this and talk about this and follow up on that. And so I went, well, if AI, is doing it, I can, these scribe softwares and things, am I still going to get those light bulb moments of following up? And for me personally, I'm finding, yes, I am still getting those moments because I don't forget anything. Then it's all there, what we talked about. And I still have to read through for quality control and everything. So I can still really go through and make sure I'm being thorough with my patients. Differentials, I go, well, if I'm not using that muscle to make sure I'm coming up with the differentials, is it a use it or lose it situation? And I would assume it is to a point. But on the flip side of that, I go, but if I'm freeing up my time and my brain power from having to write out this record and having to come up with this list of differentials, seeing how far we've advanced just in the last decade and how fast things are moving forward, does that now free up my brain to learn more of these advanced concepts, advanced techniques, and really be a better service to the profession?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think what you just described to me is that veterinarians, this isn't about taking veterinarians out of the picture at any step of the way, right? So there are companies out there, at least on the human side, for a number of years. I've seen one here in the Phoenix area. And what they do is AI generates their list of differential diagnoses. But initially, I don't think it gave probability. So it didn't say probability of it being number one is 80%, and probability of being this is 10, and then, go down to you get like a few that are 1% chance. It just gave you the list in no particular order. And so you still had to sit and think, okay, which of these? But honestly, what will happen over time in systems like that is if the AI gets feedback, it will start giving percentages. So it will say 80% of the time with this history, physical exam, findings, and signalment, it is going to be this, and it's probably going to be correct. But the veterinarian still needs to check. And to your point, you still need to read what it writes, and you need to be thinking about it. This makes sense. Did I miss anything? So I'm hoping it will free up, to your point, it'll free up that muscle that we call brain to really spend more time on the important aspects of medicine versus just writing stuff into a record.
Oh, man. And now it's like making me circle around to like access to care. Because if we have that targeted list of differentials, can we narrow down the amount of diagnostics that we have to run and really help owners in that way? If there are financial constraints, to say, well, we have these probabilities, and yes, quality controlling that with my veterinary professional brain and saying, yes, what I have in front of me makes sense. Let's go down this road. I know I've had many a sleepless night where, I've had to treat for the treatable. Can you tell I went to the University of Florida with Uncle Mikey there, to treat for the treatable and hope for the best. And that can be really, really nerve-wracking sometimes because you just don't know which way things are going to go, especially in a very sick animal. But if there's these probabilities, then, it may make empirical treatment make a little bit more sense, or help our diagnostics be more targeted and really allow us to benefit the pets and the pet owners a little bit more in that way.
3 weeks ago, I was in the Philippines, and 2 weeks ago, I was in Portugal lecturing. And one of the things I always tell people in my lectures is, and I'm gonna give credit to this to Mike Willard. I don't know if you know Mike; he's retired now, but a GI doctor at A&M for many years, and just an amazing guy. And he used to always say he used to always tell students, and I think this is really important: if you're going to run a test, know what you're going to do with the answer, have a reason for running it. So don't do, or procedure. Don't do something if you have no idea what you will do with that information. And I think that's what you're speaking to. You can submit all kinds of lab work and you can do all kinds of things. But if the result isn't going to matter in how you treat it, why are we spending the money? Like, and we do that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those where it's almost like an algorithmic approach of, if this, then that. But yeah, and that's where, kind of talking about the influence of AI, we're not taking veterinarians out of the equation here, because if this, then that, okay, well, if I do that, what's that going to change? How's that going to influence my plan? And I've certainly wanted to run the test just because I want to know. But if we're going to do that, that has to be communicated with the owner and say, if it's pancreatitis, we're not necessarily going to change what we're doing here, but we'll have a little bit better idea of what's going on, and making sure we're at least communicating if it's not going to change our plan.
Right. This is a little bit of an aside, but it made me think about while we were talking about AI. I was in Japan a few months ago talking with a company that have been able to add AI to CT to the point where now they can do ultra low dose CT. So a normal CT gives you about 20 millisieverts of radiation, and these ultra low dose CTs give about 0.8, which means that you could scan every year. And these AI. So what happening is the AI is, fixing the scans that come back to make them more readable. So the example that they showed me, there was a woman who had a mammary tumor, and she had a regular mammogram in 2011, 2012, 2013. And then and she was normal. No evidence of neoplasia 2011, 2012, but 2013, she had a big tumor. And they went back with the AI and they could see it in 2011. So they could have treated her when she had a small tumor. The thing that excites me about that, and I'm having trouble getting the company excited about animal health because I don't think they understand the amount of money there is, but we could scan dogs, when they get to be, say, 5 years of age. We could do a scan once a year for neoplasia. And heck, I would spend that money for my dog in a heartbeat. I have labs, so I get tumors. I do that. And then we could start diagnosing early instead of, diagnosing like we do for most cancers, which are pretty late in animals. So yeah, AI is going to make some changes. I don't know where all it's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. The only thing we know is there's going to be major changes.
Yeah. And just picturing, as we've kind of laid out here, the advancement that it could potentially allow within medicine in general, if we can free ourselves up from some of the other things we were spending our brain power on. I had a professor in vet school that said your brain is like an iceberg and you can only fit so many penguins on at the same time. To that point, if I have all these penguins of differential diagnoses, which of course, like we're not going to lose our ability to come up with differentials, but if we can maybe like shrink that area down a little bit to free up more of that iceberg, then what kind of penguins could we potentially find?
Shove a few more penguins on that island. Yeah, wouldn't we all love to be able to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's just such a fascinating thing to think about in terms of, our capacity to learn and what options we might open up for that in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. So Cassie, did you want to talk about supplements?
I do. And I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly where my brain was going next was, well, if we have all these advantages and we can catch these things early, we're already seeing animals living these beautiful long lives. And can we enhance that even more as far as, quality and maybe quantity as well? And, certainly chronic disease plays a big role in that. And kind of mentioned microbiome medicine and supplements and things like that. So absolutely, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think the first thing people need to understand is there really is not a category for supplements in animals. Like it doesn't exist. In I think it was 98, the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act was passed by the US. And it was specifically for dietary supplements, but they specifically excluded animals from that act. And what the Center for Veterinary Medicine at the FDA said, and I'm going to read you a quote here. They said, The CVM is concerned about these products because we don't have scientific data to show that they're safe or even contain the ingredients listed on the label. And so they elected to not allow animal supplements to be included in this Dietary Supplement Health Education Act. So really, if you're an animal health product, you're either a drug, which means you've been approved by the FDA, or you're food. Now, what happened is that there were tons of compounds already being sold as supplements in animal health. For example, your example, probiotics, tons of them being sold, minerals, vitamins, all of those were already being sold. So now what do we do? So the National Animal Supplement Council, NASC, stepped in and they said, we'll be this go-between between the FDA and these producers who have these unapproved animal products. And that's the role that they have played for many years. In fact, I think they have over 400 different ingredients now that are NASC certified, but they're unapproved animal drugs. Now, why, you might say, well, why would you not just go through the FDA? Well, I'll give you an example from my own experience. I am currently working on a compound that is known to be extremely toxic. But when we microdose it, it has some really incredible benefits that we're only starting to figure out. But for one, it is an anti-itch product. Now, I could take that product through the FDA. I'm doing a little clinical trial right now, small, just to look at efficacy. We've already got safety. I could take it through the FDA, but instead of it being, say, maybe being able to sell a month's supply for $40, $45, it'd be $90 to $100 easily. And there are lots of people around the world with dogs that itch that can't afford $100 a month, which is Apoquel or Elanco's new drug. I mean, they're all about the same. They're very expensive. People can't afford it. So that's the reason you don't necessarily want to go through the FDA, because you want a product that you don't want to have to sell at a premium price. I don't think anti-itch necessarily needs to go through the FDA. So,
oh my goodness, I have so many questions now. I don't know which one to ask first. And matter of fact, I'm gonna ask you this next one, but I'm gonna write down my other one so I don't forget what they are. The option to take a product through the FDA or not, is there some sort of regulation that says in this context you can market this as a supplement, in this product in this context you have to go through the FDA?
Yes and no. So if you decide not to go through the FDA, then you have to be very careful. You cannot make a claim, right? So you couldn't say this is for osteoarthritis. Let's go back. Let's talk about CBD. Here's a great example. I mean, every veterinarian in the world has questions about CBD and, have had clients come in and ask about CBD. So CBD is an unapproved animal drug at this point. There is no FDA approved CBD product. There is on the human side. There's a couple, but they're for rare seizure disorders in children. So we use CBD in an unapproved sense, which means that on the label, we can't say it's for alleviation of pain. That would be a claim. We can say it may alleviate discomfort. Okay. Pain, discomfort, I don't know. We can't say it's for anxiety, which we all know. People use CBD for anxiety in dogs. We can't say that. We can say may calm your dog. So there's certain words you can use, things you can't say. Essentially, you cannot make a claim that you treat, mitigate, et cetera, any disease if you're not an approved drug. And then when you take a drug that may have safety issues, NASC is, if you're not going to go through the FDA and if you want their certificate on your product, you're going to have to prove, and that's what we're trying to do right now. You're going to have to show that you have a lot of safety data.
Okay. So it's not necessarily that the active ingredient in the product determines whether or not the FDA is involved or not. It's how the product is presented. And is there a label claim using these kind of legal protected terms, of which I just learned that new is one of them. You can only say new for a certain period of time after something is released onto the market. So there's a lot of those words that are regulated.
There's a lot of regulations. Yes. And if you get into this area, you try and learn them. And there's changes all the time. There's changes going on right now about foods and how they're regulated. And the American Association of Food, AFCO, is changing. And I actually was talking to a lady the other day that their group is looking at potentially becoming sort of an intermediary for food through the FDA to be regulated. It's confusing, to be honest, right now. There are ingredients that are called GRAS, which means generally regarded as safe. So like chondroitin, some of those, they've been sold forever as supplements, would fall under, they're just generally regarded as safe. They've been sold forever and lots of animals have had them and there's no issue. But, developing a drug for companion animals, very different than, say, developing a drug for production animals. So companion animals, you're really worried about safety initially and then efficacy. In production animals, you're worried about safety, efficacy, and then you're worried about tissue residues. And, is anything of this particular drug going to be left in the animal when it goes to market? And are people going to get it when they eat the food? And so there's a whole lot more you have to think about. You have to figure out residues. You have to figure out withdrawal times. So, they have to be off this for a month or for 2 weeks before they go to slaughter. Just a lot of extra things to think about. Even if you're selling as a supplement on the livestock side and not as a supplement in quotes and not as a drug.
Yeah, it just very complicated. A lot to keep in mind when you're going through and you're developing these things. And I want to talk more about your interest in supplements and your role on the supplement side of things. You've talked about, it's anti-itch and this other study that you're excited about, which you have a whole, what's the right word? A company dedicated to, these effective animal supplements, which was news to me when we first started talking about doing this interview. I went to Google and I found Dr. Fossum's Pet Care. I'm guessing that some of the interest on the supplement side of things really has to do with what we talked about there at the beginning of the podcast, where there's some serious concerns as far as availability and development of pharmaceuticals and things in the United States. Tell us more about that. It's such an interesting company and products that you have available.
So I started a number of years ago, 4 years ago to be exact. I actually became very interested in CBD because I had, I've lost him since, but I had a 14-year-old Labrador with elbow dysplasia who also had chronic kidney disease and didn't tolerate nonsteroidals, but he needed something. And when I started looking through the literature, honestly, I was appalled. So this is the issue with supplements that everybody should be aware. They're not regulated, which means that other than, the FDA may be occasionally checking to make sure that you're not making label claims or, saying things you should say, by and large, these products are not regulated. And so what I found is that there was a study that showed that 70% of the CBD products that were on the market did not meet their label claims. Many of the products actually didn't have any CBD in them. They had hemp oil. Hemp oil does not have cannabinoids in it. So you're buying like a really cheap oil at a really expensive price. Some of them had a lot more THC in them. Some of them said they had none and they actually had a lot. And dogs are very sensitive, as you know, to THC, much more sensitive because they have more receptors than people do. And so I was like, oh, boy, I don't trust any of these. And then the other thing that happened is that I started looking at some of the very reputable human companies that were now selling products for dogs and cats. And they had spent no time trying to figure out how to dose a dog or a cat. Humans, as they go, take one pill a day. Doesn't matter. If you're an adult, take one pill a day. But we don't do that. Veterinary medicine is all milligrams per kilogram because we treat 2-pound dogs and 150-pound dogs. We can't just give the same size, does not fit all in veterinary medicine. And so they had not contemplated that. And I had people coming in with products saying, I don't know how to dose this. And I'd look at it and go, I can't help you because I can't either, because I can't even figure out what they have in this product. So that was when I decided, how hard could this be? I'll just start my own company. We'll make a good product. Oh gosh, I never anticipated how difficult it would be because veterinarians were afraid to even talk about CBD. In fact, they were regulated against it in some states. And although that is getting better, it's still a problem. Veterinarians are still really concerned about what they can and can't say. So that's where I got started. I would never recommend anybody start with a product like CBD. So what I sort of do is I look out there and I go, well, is there a good product? And is there potentially a natural product that could be cheaper? So my same dog, 14 years old, starting to show signs of cognitive dysfunction. And so I reached out to my friend, Curtis Stewie, who's a board certified neurologist and surgeon, and said, Curtis, what are we using for canine cognitive dysfunction? And what would you use? And he said, well, I'd give like these 9 ingredients if I could to every dog. I'm like, well, let's do it. Let's put those 9 ingredients in a pill. No owner can afford to do that, but we can do that. And let's sell a product for canine cognitive dysfunction. So we put that together. We did a small study. We saw almost a 40% improvement in dogs' cognitive scores within 30 days. So that meant that those dogs, with canine cognitive dysfunction, one of the major issues, and there are many, but one of the major issues is they start being vocal at night and walking around at night. They flip their day night. And so people don't sleep. And that was one of the things that we saw get reversed pretty quickly in many of these dogs. So that's what we do is we just try and find a natural product or products that may help. And again, my goal is to avoid going through the FDA if I can, just because I want affordable products. And I know that it's going to double or triple the cost of anything I'd want to produce if we had to go through the FDA. Plus, it's going to add years and years. But that doesn't mean that I don't think we should have science-backed products. I do believe in science-backed products, even as supplements. Just I don't know that we need to do everything that's required to get FDA approval or spend that amount of time.
I can hear like just the love of your animals of, I've got this 14-year-old dog. What can I do? And how can I improve his quality of life when it's starting to diminish? And the importance of having these type of supplements available and things like that. And also it sounds like as you've gone down this road of developing these supplements and doing these studies, like you said, science-backed and making sure that they're effective, that it's been shocking to see the process with, the FDA and approval and how that adds to the cost of care. And what is something you'd really like to leave listeners with in terms of talking about products that we can use and management of chronic disease and how you see that part of veterinary healthcare going forward?
That's a great question. And there's a lot we can unpack there, but let's leave it with this. I think that the public and veterinarians as well, quite honestly, need to be aware that the FDA process is there for a reason. And there's, a ton of testing that occurs and products that come out the other end are for the most part, had enough testing that I think people can be comfortable that there's good safety data and even good efficacy data. With supplements, people should understand that the regulation is not there. Most of those products are safe. Efficacy, who knows? Honestly, I would tell you that most of the joint products that we all use as veterinarians, there's no data to back those up. In fact, the only thing I've found to back it up, it has data behind it, is the omega-3s. If you really want to be honest, that's pretty much it. So understand that efficacy data may not be there, hopefully safety data, but it is a little bit buyer beware. Check, make sure you're buying from a reputable company, and do a little due diligence in those products. And I would say that for veterinarians. Supplements aren't bad. They're going to be a lot cheaper. That's how many products come to market, but we should do our due diligence on them.
Sure. It sounds like you're saying there's a major role for supplements to play here in addition to our FDA approved drugs. We absolutely should keep that open as an option, especially when we're talking about managing chronic disease. The passion behind developing supplements of, really making sure that there are, effective treatments available for animals that are affordable.
Affordable. That's really the key. They need to be safe. They need to be effective. They need to be affordable. So what we should be doing is, again, we should be doing our clinical trials in dogs, which means we need to set up networks to find dogs with disease quickly and enroll them into clinical trials, because that benefits dogs and it benefits people. And that's the direction I think the majority of drug development in this country should be done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I didn't go back to the questions I wrote down. And so I would love the opportunity at some point in the future to talk again and learn more about some of those pathways and how they're influencing chronic disease. But here in the meantime, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for sharing just your experiences, your passion, your knowledge about all of this, because it is incredibly important.
Oh, thank you. This is fun. This is really my passion, as you can tell. It's been great fun talking with you. Thank you for having me.
A huge thank you to Dr. Fossum for joining me on this episode. I really, truly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, of course, to all of you out there listening. Always appreciate it when you tune into this show. I hope you had some great takeaways from this episode. If you did enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts, so other veterinary professionals like you can find our show and other great content we try to put out there. You can also explore more episodes by checking out the VetFolio website or listen wherever you get your podcasts. We're always eager to hear your thoughts and ideas for future episodes, so feel free to reach out to me at dvm@vetfolio.com, connect on Facebook at Dr. Cassie DVM, or follow me on Instagram at dr.cassie, CASSI.dvm. And remember, if one animal is better off because of you today, it's a great day.